Today we're making sharp edge gemstone style dice. Now the process is pretty much identical to regular dice, but they just look awesome. And honestly, everybody who has a ton of followers on Instagram and Twitter makes them, so I figured I'd give it a shot. So the dice that I usually make and the ones that you typically buy are these kind of rounded edge ones. They go in a big tumbler and they're more safe and not hurty, so that's what people typically make. I, however, bought this set from Norse Foundry, and I'll put a link in the description below in case you want to make one, that has purely sharp edges. They are designed to be an extremely sharp set of dice. Now we're going to make these the same way we did with the other molds, using a small D6 as the sprue. You could use other methods, but this is the way that I prefer. We put a hot glue dab down onto a smaller D6, you can use a regular D6 if you want, and glue it to the end. Because of these sharp edges, you may have to try this a few times, but if it stands up on its own, you're pretty much good to go, because that's all we need it to do in the cup, right? And because these are heavy, it really is important that you don't push terribly hard on them. As long as they stick to the dice, they'll get the job done. My typical area that I like to put things on is put glue on the 6 side of the D6 and then put them in a Dixie cup. A Dixie cup seems to be about the right size for my purposes, so I'm going to go ahead and glue that down, and that gives us plenty of area to pour the silicone around on. So I go ahead and glue up an entire set of these things, and you can see here all of them have plenty of room, and now we can move on to the silicone. I like to use Moldstar 15 slow silicone. It's a platinum based silicone, and I've never had any problems with tacky dice coming out of these. Now you can use your favorite, but this is what I like to use. Now I'm making enough for a full set and a little bit of extra. I wanted to be able to make 1 or 2 extra D20 only dice. Now I don't get to do that, but that's because I run into a problem, and I'll show that as we go here. I'll point out my mistake. So I go ahead and mix equal volumes of this stuff, because that's what it tells me to do. If it told me to do otherwise, I'd do otherwise. Mix it up for 5 minutes to make sure I get a super uniform color. If you don't mix it up enough, you're going to have problems with tackiness down the line, so really make sure you mix it. And I use a vacuum chamber to remove all my bubbles. You don't have to. Some people say you can use a pressure pot only and you're just fine, but I don't think so. And here's mistake number 1. Do you see how full that is? Do you see? Because I'm about to pull a bunch of air out of it when I turn this vacuum on. When I turn this vacuum on, all the air is going to come up and out, and it's going to turn into bubbles. A lot of bubbles. A lot of bubbles that are going to overflow, and I react too quickly. I turn it off and pull the air intake valve, and it goes a little bit everywhere. Just listen. Cutting that off before my profanities start coming through. Be smart like the second time I went through this and split it into 2 separate cups if your cup has a chance of going over. That's how I did it the first time. I was just trying to rush through this, and a rush job is a bad job, right? So I pour the silicone on the side of this thing so that it swells up from the bottom. You don't want to pour over the top, or that's just another chance of getting air bubbles, and that's a waste of what we just did. I mark each cup with which dice is in it so I know how far to cut down, and I go ahead and make some more silicone so that I can replace the batch that I did before, and I start filling the rest of these up until I've got my completed and filled molds. I let the molds sit overnight so that they are completely cured before I start doing anything to them, especially taking this X-Acto knife here and cutting along the side of them. Now I pushed the X-Acto knife right up against the dice, and I was told that doing this against metal dice would mean that the metal dice don't get hurt and you could do it over and over again. I didn't find that to be the case. My metal dice have a scratch on them, but oh well, they're still pretty cool gold dice. After you cut down a little bit, I cut about halfway down the side of it so that the mold will stand up on its own. The dice pop right out, and you can see here that's a completed mold. It's also got the extra part called the sprue there, where excess resin can go over the top, which you want to make sure you always have a little bit of excess. I like to take a little bit of blue painter's tape and take it around the outside of this thing and pinch it up the side so that it's a nice tight seal all the way around. Now we can go into the actual fun part, the resin. The molds are great and I can use these molds for forever, but now let's do the resin. I like to use Art and Glow resin. It's never failed me before now that I have these new platinum silicone molds, and I mix 2 little 30 milliliter cups of them, and I mix it again for 5 minutes. Unmixing will mean you have an uncured resin. There's tons of bubbles in there. That's what the pressure pot's for. Here's my secret weapon for transparent dice. I'm sure you've seen these before. They're the little water-based food dye. I put 2 drops. That is enough to get the color that I want, and any more might actually uncure your dice and they'd become tacky because they're water-based. Everyone will tell you don't do that, but I don't think it's a problem. My dice came out fine. I also use this alcohol ink with silver glitter. I put about 3 drops of that in there, and that's a decent amount of liquid, so I don't want to overdo it anymore, and I call that good. Now I'm using my patent pending 2 pipette method, one for squeezing things out, and while that one's being squeezed out, the other one can be sucking up the rest of the resin. I go ahead and fill all of these molds, tilting a little bit to the side and making sure I push the pipette to the edge so that air can come out the hole that I'm pushing down in there. And I overfill a little bit with resin just to be safe. I take the excess resin that I have here and put a little bit of black alcohol ink in it so that at the end we can see what a little bit darker of one would look like. Now I'm going to go ahead and put mine in a pressure pot. Again, you don't have to do this, but I like to because I get a consistently clear product with no bubbles. I go ahead and lock down the pressure pot, and from there I go ahead and put my air pump into it and fill the pressure up until I get around 30 to 40 psi. That's good enough to get me transparent dice, so that's all I really need. And bam, look at those dice. They're so good looking. I'm so proud of how these came out with the colors and the glitter that I used. They look like sapphire gemstones, and I've got a working set of molds here, so if I wanted to make ruby ones, I could do that as well, or emerald, or whatever I want. I love the sharp edges on these, and I know there exists molds out there that you can buy that have sharp edges, like from House of Molds, but they're $99. I made this set for $50 total, and if I was a little more gentle with the gold dice, I could keep making sets over and over and over, so I'll take half price any day. And these look spectacular. The glitter with the transparent blue from the food coloring, I haven't found anything that can beat the kind of transparency that food coloring gives me. If you have an idea of something, let me know. And you can see here the actual difference between the sharp edge dice versus the rounded. It's pretty night and day how awesome these are, honestly. I just love the super sharp edges, and that's the reason, in my opinion, that everybody on Twitter and everybody on Instagram uses these dice, because they just generally look better. Now, we have to do a little bit of cleaning up of the sprues, and I'm going to show you how to do that, but there's some things I'm going to leave for a different video, because you can see here, this is the complete dice after I've cut the sprue off, right? So let's show you how to cut it with these little hobby shears here, and I'm going to cut the sprue off of the D6, and really, it's not bad because the resin isn't as hard as you think it is. Just cut until you get a semi-regular edge going. From that edge, all you have to do is polish like you normally would have to do for the edges that aren't quite ready anyway, and people keep asking for a polishing video for how I polish my dice to get such a clear product. I'm planning to do one exclusively on that because there's a bunch of different ways that you can go about it, and I can't fit it in one video, so be looking out for that video in the future. But for now, let's just take a look at these dice. Even if I have them unfinished with no inking on the numbers, they look really, really good, and I will finish them in the polishing video. One thing I do want to say is whoever gets the top comment in terms of likes down below can pick the color of the numbering that's going to be in them. Now, we also want to check back on the one that we darkened, and this looks like a super deep dark sea, and I love it, and I may make a set like that in the future. So let me know some other dice videos you might want to see in the future. I have a bunch planned right now, and I am looking at the comments, figuring out what you all want to see, and I've got some other ones coming up. So please subscribe if you might want to see more, and maybe consider sharing this with somebody else you might want to make some dice with. And please talk to me in the comments because I really do enjoy talking to y'all. Thank you, and have a great day.